All right, so the next question comes from Cindy, right? Cindy asks, what happens if you're arrested under false allegations in a retracted story in a police report?
So we talked about this the other day, Dakota, right? We talked about it the other day. So what they try to do with you guys is they are trying to create a conflict, right? Because without a dispute, without a conflict, there is nothing to judge. Because all that a judge is simply an arbitrator of a conflict that exists. That's all he is. So if there's two parties that are coming together in conflict, one saying that this person didn't do something, didn't fulfill an obligation, this one saying I did fulfill the obligation, now you need arbitration to be able to determine an outcome, right? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a conflict with you, okay? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to draw everybody back. So when you look at sports, for instance, the best position to be on is not defense because the other team is going to score. The best position is on offense because that means you're going to score, right? So what we have to do, what you need to do, sister, you need to stop defending yourself, right? Don't worry about the thing. All the things that you just mentioned are all distractions. They're trying to distract you to create a conflict, to get you to actually do what they want. They want to create a conflict so that you will defend yourself. And that's what you're doing right now. You're defending yourself by saying, oh, they retracted the story. Oh, they did this. And they said, don't worry about any of that. You now need to go on offense. And you go on offense by accusing them of a crime. Because if government commits a crime in the pursuance of any outcome, that outcome is going to be unlawful, it's going to be unconstitutional, and it's not valid, period. So you go on offense. Stop defending yourself. Don't worry about the things they said. At some point in time, that will be significant when it comes to injunctive relief. But initially, to overcome the government and the oppressive acts that they're committing against you, you go on offense. You figure out where they committed a crime against you, and I'll tell you exactly where. It's jurisdiction. The state has no authority to be able to oversee that dispute. Because when the officer brings an accusation against you, such as the case that you have, the officer represents the state. When the state becomes the accusing party, then the state itself cannot be the judge in the party. And as a result, the judge has a constitutional obligation to recuse himself because he has a conflict of interest. He works for the plaintiff, as does the officer, as does the prosecutor, as does CPS. They all work for the state. The state cannot be both accuser and judge in the same party because that would be a conflict of interest. So Article 3, Section 2 of the United States Constitution says, in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. So when a state or the body of men that make up the state, if any agent or any member of that body of men bring an accusation against you, that judge has a constitutional obligation, codified in Article 3, to recuse himself because he has a conflict of interest. He works for the plaintiff. That is a crime. And the moment that crime is committed, everything that the state produces from that moment forward is unlawful. It is unconstitutional. It is fully void without force or effect to the parties involved in dispute, because any time that a court acts without jurisdiction, what it renders is void, non-binding. Refer to Civil Rule 60b-4. Okay? So in order for a court to render a legally binding decision, it must have two things. It must have subject matter jurisdiction and it must have personal jurisdiction. Subject matter jurisdiction is the right to oversee the type of case that's brought before it. So in the case of a death, for instance, you wouldn't bring that to a small claims court because they wouldn't have subject matter jurisdiction to oversee the disposition of a deceased asset. You would bring that to a probate court. The probate court would be the court that would have subject matter jurisdiction to oversee the disposition of a deceased assets. Now, the second thing that they must have is they must have personal jurisdiction. Personal jurisdiction is the right to oversee the parties involved in a dispute. So when Article 3 says, in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction, what that says is that if a state is a party in a cause, then personal jurisdiction, because the authority to oversee the parties involved in the dispute, is constitutionally assigned to the United States Supreme Court. No other court in the country has personal jurisdiction to oversee the parties in dispute if a state is named a party. So by that breach of constitutional obligation, by that jurisdictional breach, that creates a jurisdictional error. And through that jurisdictional error, now whatever that court produces is unconstitutional. Refer to Civil Rule 60b-4. 60b-4 says that a judgment is either valid or void. It's valid in all instances except for when the court rendering the decision lacks either subject matter jurisdiction or personal jurisdiction. If the court lacks either one of those two things, what it produces is unconstitutional and void. And a void judgment is always in forever void. It can never become valid because the court can never obtain jurisdiction when it lacks jurisdiction. In fact, the United States Supreme Court behind me here in January, they made a ruling that stated that the difference between a claims processing rule, which would be an appeal, and a jurisdictional rule is that a jurisdictional rule can never be waived. It can never be forfeited because jurisdictional rules derive from statute. It is the first duty of the court. Before that court can even call anybody in, it must determine whether or not it has jurisdiction. And if it exceeds the jurisdiction that it has, what it produces is void because it had no authority to be able to even take action in the case. So your case is void. What they're doing to you is unconstitutional. Don't fall into the trap of allowing them to create a conflict. Step back from the conflict and don't engage them in the arguments that they're presenting to you because they're trying to create a dispute. Say there is no dispute because you, court, had no authority to bring me in. You, judge, have no authority to oversee this because you, judge, have a constitutional obligation codified in Article 3 to recuse yourself. And if you don't, then I'm sorry to tell you, but Hill versus the United States says that anytime a judge acts without jurisdiction, he's warned against the Constitution and committed the crime of treason. And that's a very, very serious punishment. So step back, go on offense, don't defend yourself anymore. You have nothing to defend, go after them. Point out the crimes that they committed and don't talk about anything after that. Thank you.
All right.